on the contradictions of capitalism. I'm not sure when I first became interested in capitalism as a concept. I must have heard the word in sixth form, I suppose, in history. And at university, reading history, I read books, Religion and the Rise of Capitalism by Tawney, and came across the ideas of Max Weber and others. So it was a subject that began to interest me and interests me very much now, because it is one of the big fault lines in history, both before capitalism and after, and also capitalist countries and socialist or communist countries. And in this interest, I've begun to understand more deeply what all this is about, partly through reading carefully Adam Smith, who in many ways gave the blueprint or outline. He was aware, as were others, that capitalism wasn't new in England. It was coming into Scotland, which is what interested him. And so he, like those on the continent faced with this new phenomenon, tried to analyse it and explain it. And he was mostly positive about it, but he did see that the huge division of labour and the new kinds of work organisation led to a very demoralised, potentially, workforce who just spent their time doing some tiny part of the making of a pinhead, as he put it. So it wasn't really until the 19th century that the greatest analyst of capitalism, who three-volume work, Das Kapital, Capitalism, Karl Marx, and he explained some of the contradictions of capitalism. Basically, what capitalism is about the adding of a third factor, important factor, to economic life. Most societies are based on land and on labour, slave or free or whatever, and that is it. What capitalism does is add capital. Capital means congealed wealth, saved, stored, accumulated wealth, which gives you power. And what had happened, and there are elements of capitalism, as Weber said, right back to the earliest societies. Some people have stored wealth in various forms and gives them power. But what became predominant, Marx and Weber thought, from the 16th, 17th century was that capital became an equal, and then increasingly in the 19th century, the dominant form of economic power. And so the landlords, the industrialists, the other people had the control over the levers of the economy through their accumulation of capital. And the contradiction, as Marx pointed out very simply, was that because of this factor and because of another, which is technology, what tends to happen is that when you move from a peasant pre-capitalist society to a capitalist society, there was then a tendency for an improvement in the power of technologies. And that begins to shift the ratio between labour, between people's work and labour, and the people who control the capital. And so gradually you replace, most famously, you replace human beings in factories or elsewhere with machines so that they get paid less and less or put out of work. So capitalism, read in tooth and claw, is behind things like the deindustrialization of northern England in the later part of the 20th century, or the hollowing out of the middle of America in recent years. And you can move to a world where you have a few very, very rich individuals who control almost all economic production and therefore also have access to political power. And this is the big contradiction, because Marx's idea was that each mode of production, including the earlier ones of feudalism and serf societies and so on, has an internal built-in contradiction which builds up like a river behind a dam, and then it collapses, the dam collapses, and you move to a new phase. And his idea was that you moved from feudalism to capitalism, and then the contradictions would grow so great that that would collapse and you'd move to communism. And this was his prophecy and his prediction, and he believed that you would then have to wipe away all the previous mechanisms like private property, which is behind capitalism. His predictions sort of work, and at the moment one can see that it's quite an accurate portrait of what is happening. We know that the amount of gross inequality between a few mega rich individuals who own 1% of the population of the world, own whatever it is, 90% of the assets in the world. So technology is playing more and more a part of that, because it's getting more and more powerful very, very rapidly, but also financial instruments. The whole way in which the financial system works, which rewards capital beyond labour, is behind what is happening now. There are other kinds of contradictions, though, in capitalism, because which have interested me. There are moral contradictions, because as Alan Smith was aware, it has its own morality. It places acquisition, pursuit of wealth, as the primary goal of a society, because everything is measured in terms of wealth and money. And this can eat away at all kinds of morality. This is why someone like R.H. Tawney, who was a Christian socialist, felt that capitalism was amoral, and you needed to tone it down at least into an acceptable form of socialism. So it can be a contradiction between the economic system and the moral system. It can also be a contradiction between the capitalist system and the democratic system. You see this happening in many parts of the world, that the mega rich are becoming more and more politically powerful. At the trivial level, in America, you can't even begin to run for office, high office of any kind, like president or a senator, unless you have millions of pounds at your disposal for the campaign. And so money becomes the root of power, and you buy your way in to political office. And this is a form of corruption which we see increasing in many parts of the world. So there's a contradiction between capitalism and morality and politics and even the society, because what the capitalist system does is sucks labour, i.e. children and young people, out of their home life into the capitalist market, throws them there, and they are cut off. And so I have observed this and studied it a good deal. You get a system of atomistic individualism, which is created partly by this capitalist system, and it leads to efficiency and rationality, but also, as Weber and others have pointed out, to the over-bureaucratization or rationalization of society and the dreaded iron cage which surrounds each of us. And so the breaking down of social systems as capitalism becomes more powerful is another kind of contradiction or consequence of capitalism. So it's brought untold wealth to human beings, and a great deal of happiness, but it also has to be tamed and directed, unless we want our world to be totally ruined. And I haven't even begun on the effects on the ecology and environment.